Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young and determined leader of Burkina Faso, has once again shaken the global stage. In an extraordinary display of diplomatic momentum, 8 nations have formally aligned themselves with his bold vision for African unity, sovereignty, and self-reliance. This unexpected move is being seen not just as a regional development, but a global geopolitical shock. What we are witnessing is not just diplomacy, it's the awakening of a new Africa, a continent stepping away from centuries of exploitation, dependency, and foreign interference. And at the center of this seismic shift stands Traore, a man often underestimated, frequently criticized, but increasingly recognized as the voice of a defiant and rising Africa. In a series of official meetings and bilateral dialogues held in Ouagadougou, ambassadors and high-level envoys from 8 different nations formally presented their credentials to Captain Traore, signaling their willingness to engage, invest, and partner with Burkina Faso on terms dictated not from Paris, Washington, or Brussels, but from Africa itself. These nations are not merely establishing diplomatic ties. They are buying into a bigger vision, a vision of Africa governed by Africans, secured by African unity, and guided by shared dignity. From the corridors of power in Asia to capitals across Latin America, the message is becoming clear. Burkina Faso is no longer isolated. It is becoming a beacon of strategic realignment for those who seek to resist the dominant world order. Captain Traoré's emphasis on mutual respect, non-interference, and fair trade is resonating. While Western powers scramble to retain influence using outdated methods of aid, conditional loans, and covert pressure, countries aligned with Traoré are embracing partnerships grounded in respect, not control. But this shift didn't happen overnight. Since taking power, Traoré has steadily reoriented Burkina Faso's foreign policy. He expelled French troops, ended exploitative military and mining agreements, and deepened security cooperation with nations like Russia, Iran, Turkey, and China. But more importantly, he has offered something rare in African politics: clarity of purpose and a fierce refusal to bow to external pressure. The 8 countries joining his diplomatic circle now include a mix of economic powerhouses, rising regional players, and strategically important states. Their interest is not just political, it's economic, cultural, and ideological. They're attracted to Burkina Faso's untapped potential, its commitment to development without debt slavery, and its new place in the anti-neocolonial movement. Sweeping across the Sahel, analysts are calling this a diplomatic turning point. Burkina Faso, once considered one of the poorest and most unstable nations in West Africa, is now influencing regional discourse, inspiring youth movements, and setting the tone for Pan-African collaboration. Its role in the Alliance of Sahel states alongside Mali and Niger has further bolstered its credibility, proving that unity among African nations is possible without Western intermediaries. Critics in the West are quick to frame this as a turn towards authoritarianism or anti-Western sentiment. But for many Africans, it's about justice. It's about reclaiming the right to define one's own future, to protect one's resources, and to build prosperity on indigenous terms. This rise is also a warning to Western powers. The days of divide and rule are numbered. The world is moving towards multipolarity, and Traoré has placed Burkina Faso at the heart of this transformation. His voice of Africa is echoing louder by the day across borders, across languages, across generations. What's next? With these new diplomatic relationships, Burkina Faso is expected to accelerate development projects, expand infrastructure, strengthen military capabilities, and enhance regional trade. The country is also laying the groundwork for an Africa-led coalition in global diplomacy, where nations speak not through foreign advisors or imposed scripts, but with an authentic African voice. Burkina Faso's diplomatic rise under Traore is not just a story of political outreach, it is a declaration of continental rebirth, and as the world watches, many ask, can one small country, led by a 35-year-old soldier, truly challenge centuries of global hierarchy? If recent events are any sign, the answer may already be echoing across Africa. Yes, and Traore is just getting started. In another surprising turn of events that is further reshaping Africa's geopolitical landscape, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has announced the launch of a Pan-African security training academy in Burkina Faso, a bold initiative aimed at empowering African nations to defend themselves without relying on foreign military presence. This new institution, which will open in partnership with Mali and Niger under the umbrella of the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, is being hailed as a revolutionary step toward African military sovereignty. The academy will focus on advanced counterterrorism tactics, intelligence coordination, border defense strategies, and the development of homegrown military leadership. For decades, African armies have been trained by foreign powers, often taught tactics that align more with the interests of those nations than with the true needs of the continent. Traore's academy seeks to reverse that narrative. We must train ourselves, defend ourselves, and rely on ourselves, he said during the announcement ceremony. No one will value our lives more than we do. The school is expected to host military personnel from across the continent, starting with soldiers from AES member states. But interest has already poured in from countries like Guinea, Chad, and even the Democratic Republic of Congo. This indicates a growing appetite across Africa for independence in defense and security matters, a shift away from the traditional dependence on French, American, and European military aid. Critics in Western capitals have called this initiative provocative and fear it could undermine existing partnerships. But supporters argue that Africa is simply taking back control of its security, its training, and its future. This academy also sends a loud and clear message to extremist groups operating in the Sahel region. Africa is no longer waiting for foreign powers to save it. With localized training, region-specific knowledge, and patriotic leadership, these new forces will be better equipped, better motivated, and more aligned with their community's needs. But beyond military implications, the academy is deeply symbolic. It reflects a philosophical shift across Africa, a cultural and psychological awakening. It's about rewriting the narrative that Africa is a continent needing help. Instead, it is now positioning itself as a continent of builders, leaders, and protectors. This move also aligns with Traore's broader vision for continental resilience, one that includes food independence, industrialization, and technological empowerment. Just as Burkina Faso is turning away from IMF loans and Western mining contracts, it is now cutting the umbilical cord of foreign military dependency. Already. The echoes of this announcement are being felt across regional power structures. Diplomatic sources suggest that talks are underway for an AES-wide defense pact that could function similarly to NATO, but for African states, with mutual defense clauses and coordinated responses to external aggression. The West may view this growing independence with unease, but for many Africans, it is a long overdue assertion of dignity and capability. And once again, Captain Traore is leading from the front, not with speeches in international forums, but with action on African soil. From diplomacy to defense, Burkina Faso under Traore is not just rising, it's reshaping the rules. And for every new academy, every new alliance, and every new defiant act, the continent inches closer to the dream of a truly sovereign Africa. The world may not be ready for this transformation, but Africa is asterisk. In yet another powerful and unprecedented move, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has officially nationalized multiple gold mining operations across Burkina Faso, reclaiming control over some of the country's most lucrative resources from foreign corporations that have profited for decades. This bold decision, made in the name of economic justice and national sovereignty, marks a historic turning point not just for Burkina Faso, but for the entire African continent. Traoré declared that Burkina Faso's wealth must serve its people, not enrich distant boardrooms in Paris, Toronto, or London. For years, foreign mining companies extracted billions of dollars worth of gold from Burkinabe soil while leaving behind poverty, polluted lands, and devastated local communities. Under old contracts many signed during the era of neocolonial influence, Burkina Faso received only a fraction of the profits, often less than 10%, while foreign firms walked away with the rest. But now, that era is coming to an end. With a stroke of a pen and the support of both military leaders and civil society, Traoré's administration has moved to cancel exploitative contracts and transfer ownership of key gold mines to a newly created national mining authority. This state-owned entity will be tasked with overseeing extraction, ensuring environmental protections, and most importantly, redistributing wealth to Burkinabe citizens. Already, revenue from the newly nationalized mines is being redirected toward public infrastructure, schools, hospitals, and the military, according to government sources. This is not just policy, it's a revolution in resource ownership. We are not poor, Traoré stated in a national broadcast. We have gold, we have land, we have people. What we lacked was freedom, and we are reclaiming it. The move has drawn fierce criticism from Western institutions and media outlets. Some accuse Traoré of scaring off foreign investors. But for millions of Africans who have long seen their wealth stolen in plain sight, this action is being celebrated as a victory against economic colonialism. Across the Sahel and beyond, citizens are watching closely. In Mali, Niger, and Guinea, similar discussions are now gaining momentum, inspired by Traoré's defiance. The idea is simple. Africa must benefit first from Africa's riches. In the streets of Ouagadougou, the mood is electric. Miners, youth, groups, and local activists have taken to social media and public squares to express their support. Many call Traoré not just a president, but a liberator, a man who is doing what generations of leaders feared to do. This nationalization is also deeply symbolic. For centuries, Africa's gold-fueled empires funded wars and built cities far from its shores. Now, under Traoré's leadership, that gold will fund the rebirth of Burkina Faso, a nation battered by conflict and underdevelopment, but now rising with purpose. International pressure is expected to intensify. Western banks may attempt to isolate Burkina Faso financially. Sanctions could be threatened. But Traoré seems unfazed. He has already begun forging alternative economic alliances with Russia, China, and other nations open to fair trade without conditions. His message is clear. Burkina Faso will no longer trade its soul for aid. This is not just about mining. It is about a new philosophy of leadership, one that centers the people, values dignity, and places justice above profit. It is about reclaiming what was stolen and rebuilding what was broken. Captain Traoré's gold nationalization isn't just a policy, it's a declaration. Africa is done begging. Africa is done bleeding. Africa is rising. In a move that has stunned global observers and invigorated grassroots movements across the continent, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has unveiled a plan to create a Pan-African agricultural belt aiming to transform Burkina Faso and its Sahel neighbors into self-sufficient food powerhouses free from the grip of foreign food imports and Western-controlled supply chains. Dubbed the Green Sahel Initiative, the project is a bold response to decades of food dependency that has left African nations vulnerable to price manipulation, food shortages, and the influence of foreign aid organizations that often dictate policy in exchange for basic sustenance. How can a continent with fertile land and young hands still rely on imported wheat, corn, or rice? Traore asked during a press address. In Ouagadougou, we are reclaiming our right to feed ourselves, and no one can stop us. The plan includes millions of hectares of reclaimed farmland, advanced irrigation systems tailored for arid regions, organic fertilizer development, seed banks for native crops, and youth-led agricultural training programs. Unlike past efforts, led by external donors with strings attached, this is an African-funded, African-led, and African-grown mission. What makes this different? First, it's regional. Burkina Faso is not acting alone. The Alliance of Sahel States, EASE, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are integrating their efforts. Joint farming zones are being established near shared borders. Food reserves will be managed collectively, and surplus production will flow freely across their new AES internal trade corridors, free from international customs pressures and tariffs. Second, it's a challenge to the old world order. For decades, global institutions like the World Bank and IMF pushed African nations to abandon food self-sufficiency in favor of cash crops like cotton or cocoa grown for export, not for feeding the people. Traoré's vision directly rejects that model. It centers food sovereignty and puts African nutrition, health, and dignity above profit margins. Already. Tractors donated from Turkey, irrigation tech from Iran, and soil testing labs built with Russian cooperation are appearing across AES farmlands. But the most powerful force behind this movement is not technology, it is the people themselves. Young volunteers, many of whom once dreamed of migrating to Europe, are now returning to the countryside with pride, ready to be part of a national mission. Women's cooperatives are also playing a central role. In several provinces, women have been given priority access to new land titles, as the government recognizes their critical role in community-level food production and sustainability. Of course, the Western media has launched a wave of skepticism. Some call the plan unrealistic, others claim Traoré is isolating Burkina Faso from the global economy. But inside Africa, the story sounds very different. From Tanzania to Senegal, activists and farmers are praising the move as the beginning of a continental food revolution. They point to the billions spent every year importing basic staples from Europe and North America, when Africa holds over 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land. The hunger crisis, they argue, is not natural, it's manufactured. Traoré's initiative exposes the lie that Africa cannot feed itself. It proves that political will, Pan-African cooperation, and belief in the land can overturn generations of dependency. And it's not just about food. The Green Sahel Initiative is also a pathway to peace. By giving young men and women purpose, land, and hope, Traoré aims to reduce recruitment by extremist groups who prey on poverty and frustration in neglected rural zones. As tractors move, as seeds are planted, and as silos rise across the Sahel, a new kind of revolution is taking root, quiet, green, and unstoppable. Captain Traoré is not just fighting for Burkina Faso's sovereignty. He is cultivating a future where Africa grows for Africa, where no child goes to bed hungry, and where the soil becomes the sword in the battle for dignity. Asterisk. In a dramatic challenge to Western influence and decades of media manipulation, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has announced the launch of a new Pan-African Media Alliance, a bold initiative aimed at reclaiming Africa's narrative from foreign control. And distortion. For far too long, Africa's image has been shaped by voices outside the continent, voices that paint it as helpless, chaotic, and dependent. News about African leaders who stand up to imperialism is often buried, twisted, or outright silenced. But Traoré is no longer willing to allow that narrative to dominate. Asterisk. If we do not tell our story, others will continue to lie about us, Traoré said in a powerful televised statement. Africa needs its own voice, unfiltered and unafraid. And today, that voice begins to rise. Asterisk. The new alliance, composed of independent journalists, state-run broadcasters, and media professionals from across Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Guinea, and other interested nations, will be headquartered in Ouagadougou. It aims to establish a powerful media network broadcasting across the Sahel, Central, and eventually all of Africa in multiple languages including French, English, Arabic, Hausa, Swahili, and local dialects. This network will include a 24/7 news television channel dedicated to African issues, development, and resistance movements. Asterisk. A digital platform and app accessible to even the most remote areas, offering real-time news, educational content. And counter-narratives. Asterisk. A training institute for journalists focusing on ethical storytelling, investigative reporting, and media sovereignty, a fact-checking center to combat misinformation spread by foreign outlets and NGOs. The message is clear. Africa will no longer be the subject of someone else's story. It will be the author. Asterisk. Western media conglomerates and NGOs have already begun raising alarms, accusing Traoré of spreading state propaganda. But many African youth see something entirely different. They see the birth of a media resistance, a long overdue effort to break free from the stereotypes, lies, and omissions that have defined global perceptions of the continent. Asterisk. This media alliance will also partner with alternative voices from the Global South, journalists in Latin America, Asia, and the Middle East, creating a new axis of communication between formerly colonized nations, sharing experiences of struggle, resilience, and empowerment. Asterisk. The project is being funded not by the IMF or Western sponsors, but through regional contributions, cryptocurrency-based donations from African diasporas, and partnerships with friendly nations like Russia, Iran, and Turkey, all of whom have faced similar media demonization in the West. Asterisk. Already, test broadcasts have begun in parts of Burkina Faso and Mali. Young reporters are being trained. Mobile production units are being deployed to villages and conflict zones to document reality from the ground up, not from behind a desk in Washington or Paris. Asterisk. But this is more than a media project. It's a cultural revolution. Asterisk. For the first time, rural farmers, women's cooperatives, and traditional leaders are seeing their lives and voices reflected on screen, not as victims, but as builders of Africa's future. The Media Alliance aims to reconnect African people with their own history, heroes and hopes free from colonial distortion. Asterisk. Traoré's strategy is visionary. He understands that controlling resources and borders is not enough if the battle for hearts and minds is lost. True liberation, he believes, requires control over the narrative over who gets to define Africa. Asterisk. This move is shaking not only media circles, but also the political establishments that rely on public misinformation to justify interventions. sanctions, and resource exploitation. And just like that, a new front in Africa's liberation struggle has been opened not with weapons, but with cameras, microphones, and truth. Captain Traore is making history once again, not by seeking approval from global powers, but by giving Africa the tools to speak for itself in its own voice, for the world to hear. In yet another groundbreaking development, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has officially proposed the creation of a Pan-African digital currency, marking a revolutionary shift in Africa's economic independence and its fight against the domination of the CFA franc and Western-controlled financial systems. Named the Kelm, a word drawn from West African heritage meaning freedom or strength. The proposed digital currency will serve as an alternative to the CFA franc, which has long been seen as a relic of French colonial control over the economies of 14 African nations. Traoré's announcement came during a joint economic summit between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, members of the AES, Alliance of Sahel States, where leaders agreed in principle to abandon the CFA franc and transition toward a sovereign, digital financial system that ensures full control over monetary policy, trade, and development. Nation without control over its currency is a nation that is not truly free, Traoré declared. We will no longer allow our prosperity to be measured, manipulated, or managed in Paris. Our wealth must be protected by our own hands. The Kelm will initially be launched as a blockchain-based digital currency backed by gold, lithium, and other natural resources abundant in the Sahel. It is designed to be secure, transparent, and resilient against external manipulation, unlike the CFA, which is pegged to the euro and controlled by the French Treasury. According to officials involved in the project, the Kelm will be integrated into mobile-based payment platforms, allowing ordinary citizens, including rural farmers and traders, to conduct transactions, store savings, and access microloans directly from their mobile phones, bypassing foreign banks and intermediaries. But the most radical aspect of this currency is its vision for regional unification. The goal is to extend the Kelm beyond Burkina Faso, allowing Mali, Niger, Guinea, and other interested countries to join the system. The alliance envisions a future where African trade is conducted in African currency, eliminating reliance on the dollar or euro, and shielding economies from external shocks, sanctions, and devaluations. Call for digital monetary sovereignty has inspired excitement among young entrepreneurs, fintech developers, and economists across the continent. For decades, African economies have been held hostage by foreign reserve requirements, debt traps, and currency volatility imposed by external actors. The Kelm is seen as a digital sword cutting through those chains. Of course. The proposal has triggered unease in European capitals. Financial institutions in France and Brussels have already expressed concerns about the economic implications of such a move, while warning of potential market instability. But in reality, it's their control over African money that's being threatened, not African stability. To safeguard the transition, EA's leaders have begun holding private talks with allies such as BRICS member states, exploring technical assistance, trade integration, and even the possibility of aligning the Kelm with alternative systems like China's digital yuan or Russia's Mir payment network. This currency shift is not just about numbers and transactions. It's a symbol of deeper change, a declaration that Africa will no longer measure its value through foreign formulas. For too long, African nations exported gold and imported poverty. They produced cotton but couldn't afford clothes. They grew cocoa but never owned the chocolate industry. Why? Because the currency they used served others, not themselves. The column changes that. It gives Africans the ability to define their own value, direct their own spending, and build an economy rooted in justice, not extraction. Traore's monetary revolution is still in its early stages, but the energy surrounding it is unmistakable. Across social media, youth are calling it the real independence. Economists are dubbing it the Sahel's Bitcoin moment. And while the world watches, some with hope, others with fear, Africa is moving quietly but confidently towards something historic. Economic freedom on its own terms. Once again, Captain Ibrahim Traoré is not just reacting to the world. He's reshaping it step by step, idea by idea, and now coin by coin. In a bold step that further cements his reputation as a visionary leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has announced the establishment of a Sahel Youth Military Academy, a specialized institution designed to train, educate, and empower the next generation of Pan-African defenders and leaders, not just in combat, but in ideology, governance, and nation-building. This academy, which will be headquartered in Burkina Faso and co-managed by partner states Mali and Niger, is unlike any traditional military school. It blends advanced defense training with lessons in African history, decolonization theory, ethics, governance, and sovereignty. Its mission is not just to produce soldiers, but to forge African patriots, young men and women who are intellectually, morally, and strategically prepared to protect their homelands from both external threats and internal betrayal. We have enough fighters. What we need now are warriors with vision, with discipline, and with truth in their hearts, Traoré said during the announcement. We are not building just an army, we are building Africa's shield. The Sahel Youth Military Academy will be open to applicants aged 17 to 25 from Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, with future plans to include candidates from Guinea, Chad, and other aligned nations. Trainees will undergo rigorous physical training, but they will also study African philosophy, leadership under pressure, African liberation movements, and anti-imperialist strategy. For Captain Traoré, the mind is as important as the muscle. He believes that Africa's future will not be secured by imported doctrines or mercenary armies, but by conscious youth trained to think, lead, and serve with honor. The Academy's curriculum is designed in consultation with revolutionary thinkers, military advisors, and educators from across Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East. Some of the ideological framework is inspired by historical movements such as Thomas Sankora's vision, Amilcar Cabral's teachings, and the Cuban model of defensive education. But the core message remains clear. Africa must defend itself with its own sons and daughters, trained in its own spirit, and loyal to its own soil. The timing of this move is no coincidence. As Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger continue to distance themselves from France, the UN, and ECOWAS, there's growing concern about foreign-backed destabilization, infiltration, and the use of soft power to undermine their independence. The Academy serves as a preemptive defense mechanism, creating a new generation of leaders immune to neocolonial influence. It will also address a long-standing issue in the Sahel, youth unemployment and hopelessness, which have fueled mass migration and made young people vulnerable to extremist recruitment. By offering them purpose, education, and a role in nation-building, the Academy transforms potential social crises into powerfully directed energy. Western analysts have criticized the move, calling it militarization of youth or indoctrination. But for many across the continent, it's seen as liberation through preparation. It's an answer to centuries of Africa being defended by others, taught by others, and led by others. Already. Thousands of applications have poured in from young men and women across rural and urban regions alike. In villages once forgotten by the state, local elders are holding ceremonies to send off their children with pride, calling them defenders of the future. Graduates of the academy will not only serve in military roles, but also be eligible for civil service, local governance, and diplomatic positions. The idea is to build a multi-skilled generation of Pan-African leaders, equally comfortable in the battlefield, the classroom, and the parliament. Captain Traore is making it clear. Burkina Faso is not just resisting, it is building. With every initiative, be it economic, diplomatic, agricultural, or now educational, Traore is laying the foundation for a sovereign civilization, not just a surviving state, and this academy may prove to be one of his most powerful legacies, a force of young, principled Africans who will defend not just borders, but dignity itself. The world may arm its proxies, fund its narratives, and twist its headlines, but Traore is responding with something far stronger: awakened youth armed with truth, loyalty, and purpose. In another landmark initiative that is electrifying Pan-African discourse, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has launched the African Renaissance Cultural Center in Ouagadougou, a monumental project aimed at reviving, preserving, and celebrating Africa's indigenous cultures, values, and identity long buried under layers of colonial domination and Western assimilation. The Cultural Center, set to become the largest of its kind in West Africa, is more than just a museum or art space. It is a symbolic fortress of memory where history is decolonized, pride is restored, and the flame of African civilization is rekindled for future generations. They took our gold, our land, our language, and even our gods. But they will not take our soul, Traore declared during the inauguration ceremony. The African spirit will no longer be exported. It will rise from the earth, from the drums, from the stories of our ancestors, and light the path forward. The African Renaissance Cultural Center will house traditional archives and oral history banks, preserving endangered languages, clan genealogies, folk tales, and spiritual knowledge passed down orally for centuries. A Pan-African arts gallery showcasing pre-colonial sculptures, sacred objects, and contemporary works from revolutionary African artists. A decolonization institute where scholars, students, and philosophers will debate African knowledge systems, write new curriculums, and publish works countering Eurocentric narratives. Performance arena for traditional music, dance, and spiritual ceremonies from across the continent. A children's storytelling dome where young Burkinab can learn the wisdom of their ancestors not through colonial textbooks, but through living words and legends. But perhaps the most groundbreaking feature is the Return Room, a solemn space dedicated to the memory of looted African artifacts still held in European museums. Every sculpture, every mask, every manuscript stolen during colonial rule is being replicated with empty pedestals next to them labeled, taken, but not forgotten. This powerful act of cultural resistance is calling on European nations, especially France, Belgium, and the UK, to return Africa's stolen heritage, not as charity, but as a matter of justice. Already, discussions are intensifying in diplomatic circles, with several African countries preparing coordinated demands for restitution. For Captain Traoré, cultural liberation is not a luxury, it is a pillar of true independence. What good is political sovereignty if our children still learn to hate their skin, their tongue, and their truth? He asked. We must reclaim the mind and the soul, not just the flag. The center will also partner with indigenous communities, griots, and spiritual elders, ensuring that it does not become an elite institution disconnected from the grassroots. Its programs will be integrated into national education, and mobile versions of its exhibitions will travel to rural villages, bringing the Renaissance to every corner of the land. Asterisk. The African Renaissance Cultural Center is already attracting global attention. Intellectuals from across the diaspora in the Caribbean, Brazil, the United States, and the UK have pledged support, offering artifacts, lectures, and cultural exchanges. Afro-descendant youth, disconnected from their ancestral roots for generations, now have a sacred place to return to physically and spiritually. Asterisk, of course. Western commentators have been quick to dismiss the project as romantic nationalism or political theater. But across Africa, the response has been overwhelmingly emotional. In Mali, elders danced and cried. In Cameroon, youth groups have begun organizing cultural festivals in solidarity. In Kenya, Maasai leaders offered to send traditional advisors to support the center. Asterisk. Because this is not just about Burkina Faso. This is about healing the African world. Asterisk, it is about repairing what colonization shattered: dignity, memory, and identity. And in doing so, it is creating a new cultural foundation, one that can support Pan-African unity, resistance, and rebirth for centuries to come. Asterisk once again. Captain Ibrahim Traoré is showing the world that his revolution is not just military, not just political, not just economic. It is civilization. With every statue erected, every language preserved, and every child told they are the descendant of greatness, the chains of colonialism grow weaker. Asterisk, and so, from the heart of Ouagadougou, the African Renaissance has found its temple, and its fire has only just begun to burn. Asterisk.